for me, the book was about wandering around in the big cities, having experiences, and how the fragments of that make up our lives then become part of global narratives about migration, identity, and what you have.
By dislocating yourself from the city that you desire to another city, which at the beginning you did not desire, creates a degree of enchantment. So Delhi for me is enchanted, but not in this blind NRI kind of a way. Badshah Jafar is what I felt at that point of time. There's a benign presence of animals throughout the book. And then my friend Kaveri talked about this sort of Buddhist connection, and I saw this sort of Buddhist connection. But I could bring in like very large human gestures through these animals, like migration with a lonely cheetah, some forest in Madhya Pradesh with a dying light, the Badshah Jafar look alike, this sort of sense of being very far away, like the complete east in Japan, and having a raccoon who's like very gently, very benign presence of a creature walking, shuffling next to you. It's like an old friend. So when people talk about migration's right and all that, and AfD against migration, that's the German right-wing party. But migration is great for these people because migrants are meant to be. The only racism that I felt, like large-scale racism that I felt ever in my life, was at Heathrow Airport when I was studying in England, by people who look like me. For a lot of people to a lot of artists moved to Germany, to Berlin, because they could afford to live there, and that created a landscape of a nurturing landscape for like artists and writers. But वो अभी खत्म हो रहा है, and we are also partly responsible for it, us as in Indians.
By वो खत्म हो रहा है, you mean this is largely because of the politics, or is it the emotional landscape which has changed?
Economics is definitely the driving force in how the over gentrification and the disparity of income. The people who are coming from these new worlds of startups and tech people, the kind of money that they earn is something that Berliners would have never dreamt of earning. I'm like white, brown, black, all Berliners I'm talking about. They've never really knew about this kind of money that existed.
Well, it was bad enough that the character left. What you say is a geopolitical reason was actually a series of conflicts between India and Pakistan, and a mixed marriage between an Indian man and Pakistani woman. Even so, the experience of going to Germany, to Berlin, did not seem to soften the sense of loss of Delhi, of India.
But when that geopolitical or this bilateral relationship to countries affect your marriage so directly, that is when you start kind of getting very nervous, because you just want to be a normal person living a normal life and having a normal bunch of friends and do normal things.
Hello and welcome to Book Show. Today we have a special guest with us, Sarnath Banerjee, whose new book, Absolute Jafar, is doing the rounds in a big way. It's supposed to be the book closest to his life, and it's going to be different for everybody, obviously. But for me, the book was about wandering around in the big cities, having experiences, and how the fragments of that make up our lives then become part of global narratives about migration, identity, and what you have. So let's ask Sarnath about how he came to write this book, what it means to him, and so on. Welcome, Sarnath.
Thank you, Pragya.
Sarnath, let's talk about Delhi first. The city that you sort of have wandered around in personally. Your characters wander around there. Are you in love with Delhi in some way now that you don't live here permanently? What does it mean to you, this city?
See, like everybody struggles to not become an NRI and have those same kind of NRI kind of aspirations when they come back home, wo darakte, wo imarate, wo khushbu, whatever, all that nonsense. So, however, having said that, by being away from an object that you desire and you love, which is imbued with old memories and old associations and edited even, like your mind tends to forget about like the troubled times that you've had or the trauma and all that kind of stuff. So you generally think of something very fondly. So having said that, by dislocating yourself from the city that you desire to another city, which at the beginning you did not desire, creates a degree of enchantment. So Delhi for me is enchanted, but not in as blind NRI kind of a way. And neither is it like when I do, the city can still completely wind me up. I can be frustrated. I can, I can burst a nerve in this city. But all in all, this is the city that feeds me and feeds my imagination and has made what I am. So, and makes my imagination work the best. So, I'm indebted to Delhi. Even now, when it's in its most declined and denuded version, even like almost like how Delhi has been mass abandoned by lots of it's great and good, and even the plumbers have moved to Goa. And it's like this big movement that has happened from Delhi to other places, especially to Goa, like a second Mohammed bin Tughlaq kind of a situation. Even in its abandoned state, Delhi still, I feel, is kind of cultural heart of not just India, but also like the global south.
One of the things that happens very early on in your book is, your character, he encounters a raccoon. And for some reason, thinks that it reminds him of Bahadur Shah Zafar. I mean, it's funny, it's sad. Why? Why bring him in? Is it because he represents something about Delhi? Lost dignity, lost charm, lost imperial sort of, the imperial raccoon and the last emperor. I mean, was that something that just came to you, or did you put it there after thinking about it a lot?
Good question, very good question, because instinctively there is no analysis. Comics for me is a very sensory medium. It's like asking, asking like a classical singer, Mallikarjun Mansoor, say for example, that what are the instincts that kind of, that made you sing it in a certain way. Ideally, it is sort of something that you embodied, meaning you've learned it through your body and you feel it through your body. This is ideal situation, I'm saying, for a comic book writer is to reach that point of sensory thing, so that pictotextually, which is what I do with text and pictures, you compose a certain sensibility and you say things that you yourself cannot articulate. You can't articulate a certain kind of sensation and thought, and music is probably the one thing that gets you closer. Now, films synthesize that using audio, all kinds of tropes, video, cutting, all that process to kind of synthesize an emotional experience that is nearest to the reality of the experience. But the filmmaker, she decides how long you need to see, what you need to see. Comics is not like that. Comics is a collaboration between Pragya Singh and Sarnath Banerjee, whoever the reader is, that I'm kind of leaning on you, on your imagination, to kind of create the picture in your head. So it is interpretative, and it is sensory, and sensations are portable to the point. I mean, comics try to make it portable. I'm trying to make you feel how I want you to feel, but not manipulating you to feel, because you have your mind working. Now, Bahadur Shah Zafar is what I felt at that point of time. There's a benign presence of animals throughout the book. And then my friend Kaveri talked about this sort of Buddhist connection, and I saw this sort of Buddhist connection. But I could bring in like very large human gestures through these animals, like migration with a lonely cheetah, some forest in Madhya Pradesh with a dying light, and very far away from home in Namibia, or a falcon who's bored because it's slept, it's hunted, it's preened. A falcon preens for 5 hours to get the lice out of their system from what they've hunted.
It's in your book.
It's in the book, yeah. So the falcon, the cheetah, the Bahadur Shah Jafar look alike. This sort of sense of being very far away, like the complete east in Japan, and having a raccoon who's like very gently, very benign presence of a creature walking, shuffling next to you. It's like an old friend.
There's another creature in your book, fascinating creature, a water body, the fish on which floats the bureaucrat. So did Delhi or did India represent a lot of that to you when you were here? Is that why the bureaucrat, he comes in your imagination later on in Berlin, he's followed you all the way there, and almost frightening actually that it's like a zeppelin.
It is like a zeppelin, right?
So were you trying to say something more than what I as an average reader might glean from it? Was it a large comment on bureaucracy that you were trying to make?
Well, a reader, especially a perceptive reader, not an average reader like you, would have their own set of interpretations, which might superimpose and sometimes surpass my own meaning making that I try to create in that comic book, which is why the joys of fiction, which is why I continue to think that fiction is probably one of the finest form of like getting into politics, to political imagination. So the Darya Shah or Hazrat Khizr, Darya Shah or Hazrat Khizr, or also Jhulelal, is something that ties up from Sylhet to Iran, to Iraq, I suppose, Euphrates. He was the man who, the messenger Pir who helped Firdausi to write Shahnama, and then Nizami to write Qais and Laila. So he has been a messenger of storytellers, sort of peer, so to say, and he always appears in green near a water body, and he carries you, and he only appears when you stop looking for him.
Like love.
Love, like bureaucracy.
All right.
Love, definitely. When you are like least expecting, that's what it happens. And most of the book is also like an extended love affair, just a basic love of things, not just a person, but everything. You know, there's a lot of. I needed to work. This book was also for me to kind of come out of that hole that we all find ourselves in right now, globally. So that Hazrat Khizr Shah on a fish, who travels on a fish, was just someone who entered my living room or whatever, my studio, when I was working on this project. I did not work on it, but I must have thought about it for like maybe over a year for him to walk in. So yeah, I mean, and I'm not trying to sound fancy. It is only when you stop synthesizing and engineering a story or a plot is when the good things actually start coming.
That's what they say, but it sort of seems like magic to someone who doesn't write. So one more question about
surrender.
All right.
It is like love, also what you're talking about, the ability to surrender to something higher, whatever, whether it's skill, whether it's absolute like music, or whether it's poetry, the ability to reading fiction is also a form of surrender. You're surrendering yourself to somebody else's imagination.
Right.
And similarly, when you write also, you're surrendering yourself to forces beyond you, you know. Otherwise it becomes packaging, कि मेरे ये मुद्दे हैं और मुझे ये मुद्दे उखाड़ना है और मुझे यहाँ तक पहुँचना है. So there's a destination. This is not destination. This is a conversation. Along the book is a visualization of a conversation that I'm having with the reader.
Sarnath, one more question about craft. You know, it's probably something you get asked a lot, but do the visuals come to you first, or do the text come to you first, or does the graphic novel just solve that problem?
Again, a good question, because it's sometimes neither also. It could be a lot of people say that comics is the visual medium. I think comics is a textual medium, number one. It's more textual than visual. You need more textual prowess to write a comics than to write a words only book, because वो words जो है वो तुम्हारा वालिद का savings account से आ रहा है. So you are very careful about how you use words, and if you write very clever comics and have fantastic images, you can still end up writing a terrible comics, because it'll be a tuneless comics. So sometimes great text would be a oof or ah or like that or whatever, you know. So you combine the two to kind of create an emotional state. Now in that you can't have a text and image coming. Sometimes it could be a musical score. Sometimes it could be like, you know, Pyasa mein ek harmonium ka bridge hota tha, which kind of, you know, cements different. It is an appearance of something, and you know that this person is going to appear just with the musical. So it is also working on the text. of the film, the script. So often in my case, it is sound, a sound or a sensation or an instinct that makes you start working on a comic book. The image of a cheetah looking up and encountering the central character, or a semi-detached house when Maulana Rouge comes to convert a man. So it could be one or two images, and then you start expanding it. जैसे कि आपको दो नोट दे दिया और आपने बोला आप बजाओ अपना यूकेलेली से इस दोनों नोट के साथ. So this is how it sort of works. So text and image अलग से नहीं, but when I'm writing, physically speaking, it looks like a जो पुराने ज़माने में हम स्क्रिबल करते ना थे जब बात करते थे टेलीफोन उसमें जब it is like हाँ it's like a lot of unintelligible scribbling which forms into a language, text and pictotextual language.
Now, tell me, since you spend half your time, I think, in Berlin and half the time in India.
More than half in Berlin.
Right. So does that sort of impose itself on you, on your writing, on the way you think? Does Berlin want you to represent a certain kind of Indian novelist, designer, artist? Do they expect to see that? And does that influence you in any way?
Well, all of Europe is a little bit culturally a little bit provincial because Europe understands itself through its own lenses, and you can't blame them because for many years people have gone to Europe and integrated and tried to understand Europeans. You know, a lot of our job has been to kind of bend backwards and walk on eggshells to kind of create context continuously for another one. So the concept of foreigner is different in Germany, and the concept of foreigner is different in India. We've been written by foreigners, Huyen Sang or whatever, Ibn Battuta, and all these people have wrote us and Megasthenes, and that kind of also shaped. And then later on, those colonialists like William Jones and Asiatic Society. So foreigners ke saath we have a kind of a more a different kind of a relationship. But in Germany, it's like 4 Nigerians enter Erfurt airport and changes the demography of the whole place. So they don't know how to handle foreigners. So they're like guests, but at the same time. So like when the Syrian refugees were coming, Berlin, despite whatever I say in the next whatever few minutes, Berlin is a very large-hearted city. I must start with that disclaimer because the number of Syrians that we had and how they integrated into the Berlin society is an impossible thing for any modern societies sort of a thing. So we will start with that kind of thing. But Berliners, the Germans had to be told when a Syrian person says no or yes, you have to ask them again. If they say that, if you go to an expensive restaurant and say that you pay the bill, and you are about to pay the bill, and the Syrian person says, no, I'll pay the bill. You say, okay. So, there are like lots of mannerism and thought tarika and modernism, clash of modernism, because our particularities is. But as people from global south, we are more adjusted to kind of understand the global north because we have like sort of, because of the cultural hegemony, but that's sort of changing. So you're constantly contextualizing yourself.
That's right.
Which kind of is very boring and extremely dull.
I'll interrupt you. Are you contextualizing or are you also having to translate?
Yeah, contextualize and translate and then, and then at some point of give up. So I call it the Haile Selassie look. Okay. Haile Selassie look is like when a very, what do you call that, a very enthusiastic intern comes to you and you don't want to listen to that person and you want to shut the person off and don't want to listen to his ideas. You don't say no to the person, you just look 2 inches above that person's eyes, right. Which Haile Selassie looked 2 inches above all its nobles' eyes, and the person will lose steam halfway through. So Germany is a bit like that. Anything complicated, they give you the Haile Selassie look. And initially you try to explain to people that things are different and nobody wakes up feeling post-colonial in India. If at all it is itself a colonial state sometimes. And you try to tell people the particularities of and you realize that there is a place where the understanding stops. And you have to fit into their imagination. So you have to continuously do that. And then one day you stop because you're not interested anymore to kind of explain things to the West. And then you liberate yourself from that world, and that's fine. On the other hand, if you are continuously your chaudhary of your own pind, which happens to a lot of men of my age in Delhi, middle-aged men who have done well or whatever, initially showed some sparks, and this usually with men, they become like literally chaudharis. They don't feel like they need to explain anything to anyone else, and that also can be a problem because you never feel vulnerable in any other world. So it's a two-edged sword. I think moving west makes you vulnerable, and staying here can also make you quite arrogant, which is what you see right now.
Which is what you see right now in Delhi or India?
Also, Indian expats who come abroad. We had something called a third world pride, that people of maybe my generation, a little older than you, would be aware of being like products of the NAM world. You had the solidarity with the Yugo people. There was like Tito. Half of Calcutta was called Tito. You shout Tito from a playground, and 10 heads is going to bob back. So there was a third world ka akkad, a kind of a willfulness of the third world. There was a khuddari kind of a situation. Sorry, I'm taking all Bollywood film names. And but now it is, so there was that pride which kind of helped you to tide through situations like, foreign British universities, American universities and all that. And it also produced some of the best minds because of that. And someone who's totally indigenously educated like Dipesh or Gayatri and all that, but then go and become very successful elsewhere. Now that has been transplanted into arrogance. So you see a lot of Indians who are not confident, of course, extremely confident, but that confidence also turned into a bit of an arrogance. So while they're settling in, Berlin has very precarious economy. Everybody's poor.
And they're settling in also into a Berlin which is probably a little less welcoming. Even the expats who are already there, the Indians who are already living there, probably don't want more immigration in a certain sense, right? Because we're okay, so now why are you coming here?
But that's the migration condition. So when people talk about migration's right and all that, and AfD against migration, that's the German right-wing party. But migration is great for these people because migrants are meant to be. The only racism that I felt, like large-scale racism that I felt ever in my life, was at Heathrow Airport when I was studying in England, by people who look like me. The people who are so there's that continuous problem. So what you're telling is like policy almost. This is going to be the policy, and the migrants are the best way to kind of stop migrants, because there's a lot of what do you call that? There's the tension of like fresh off the boat and people who are like settled like this. I call it like diaspora and spora and diaspora. तो वो spora diaspora का फड्डा तो चलता रहता है. वो that is already there, and political parties have not started using it excessively, but it is already starting. AfD now already has a lot of brown faces, just like in America. Republican has like largely brown. And if you look at Indian policies and stuff like that, they're much more adherent to like the current Western, at least not the liberal West, but the West in power kind of policies, and you see that. But Berlin as a city is resisting it. So when you ban Palestinian juluses, Palestinian demonstration, but the government bans it, it happens again, but this time organized by the Jewish people. So it is a typical outsider city. It's a misbehaved child in a school which tries to kind of bring order and peace, but Berlin continuously questions that. And that was the spirit of Berlin until recently. And now, of course, Berlin has become like this tech.com kind of a lot of desis are coming to Berlin, and they can afford they have a $12, €12 cocktail, and they say, kitna cheap hai? Dekho, Bombay jaisa hai, bilkul. But we are used to €5 ka cocktail, So the precarious ground, the vegetation of Berlin has now been wiped up by this new cosmopolitan, like, migrants who are coming, who likes nature, who bicycles, who goes to clubs, have an international set of friends, all like tech people like themselves. The prices have been jacked up. There's impossible to get a house in Berlin right now. Munich to chodo baat. So, we are effectively also killing.
Sarnath, these guys, these women and men, they don't show up in Absolute Jafar. They don't show up. The techies are not here. This is the Delhi that I grew up in, and the Delhi that you grew up in. And I'm not saying that you delve into some sentimental sort of stuff here, but it's a bit melancholy. And the Berlin you just described to me reminds me of what Delhi.
Exactly, or Calcutta in my case,
Yes.
closer to Calcutta than Delhi,
Sure.
because the dignified poor, the sexy dignified gurbat is a Calcutta trait. You know, there was no joy or there was no honor in having tons and tons of money. People were suspicious. घूस खाता है, मतलब पैसा लेता होगा कहीं से, और किसी को मतलब चूना लगा के पैसा बनाया होगा. That was a general kind of tendency of that. Money was never really looked at in any interesting rent control. People took care of the houses and food was cheap and stuff like that. And Berlin has the kind of, it's interesting, the childhood that I had in Calcutta, I can replicate that childhood. Until recently, I could replicate that childhood for my son. You know, roaming around in Berlin, roaming around the city, bus mein baith gaya kahin pe, you know, managing with like very little. Transport is free until a certain age. So, you know, like this sort of this sense of safety and sukoon is there. Yes, it's an island in the middle of a country that is continuously, you know, I mean, what to say about Germany?
The war between the war between the city and the town and the village.
These are going to be the new wars, you know. These are going to be the new wars in the future, the cities versus the... Halaki, now the cities themselves are also getting gentrified. New York is now become much more American. Berlin is becoming very German. A lot of people from southern Germany, from Bavaria are moving to... people with money are moving to these cities, which were like once upon a time like safe havens for a lot of people to kind of, you know, a lot of artists moved to Germany, to Berlin because they could afford to live there, and that created a landscape of like, you know, a nurturing landscape for like artists and writers. But वो अभी खत्म हो रहा है, and we are also partly responsible for it, us as in Indians.
By वो खत्म हो रहा है, you mean this is largely because of the politics, or is it the emotional landscape which has changed?
Economics is definitely the driving force in how the over gentrification and the disparity of income. The people who are coming from these new worlds of startups and tech people, the kind of money that they earn is something that Berliners would have never dreamt of earning. I'm like white, brown, black, all Berliners I'm talking about. They've never really knew about this kind of money that existed as salaries. So yes, sort of basically economics is driving. Politics, of course, there are lots of cuts right now because most of the money is kind of, you know, going in the name, well, they're saying it for Ukraine, but it's basically arming Germany. So schools are understaffed. You know, sports holidays, sports places are like, so yeah, there is you see like a general depletion in society in terms of like basic, the things that Europe stood for, which is the socialistic approach of like, you know, of freedom. I mean, of course, it's an old system, so it'll take a long time to destroy, but it is we are in the intermediate stage of destruction.
Destruction of what in particular?
Of those social values upon which Europe, which Europe was known for, you know, welfare state or medical and sports and education.
Is it because racial mixing was never really a part of that idea for a very long time until our recent history?
Our meaning like you're talking about Indian racism or their racism?
I'm talking about their racism.
Well, it's not overtly racist. Berlin is too amorphous or heterogeneous to kind of actually have any direct racist, like I had in London, for example, when I was a student, for example, you would not walk on certain streets because, you know, BNP, those were, and we're talking about Sadak, like pretty much central London. That level of racial fights have not broken in Berlin. I'm not talking about other parts of Germany. I'm just clearly talking about, I don't know much about Germany. I'm not a German expert. I know a little bit about Berlin. So in Berlin, there's not like that kind of racism, but there are structural racism. So there are like finding a house, for example, or in a job, there are glass ceilings, even though if you speak like perfect German, not in the tech industry, but in other industries. So there are ways in which all the holidays are Christian holidays. The Turkish people have continue being like the Mirpuris of Punjabi Mirpuris in Manchester. So, you know, there are like social mobility has not happened, but yeah, the society is not naturally cosmopolitan, let's say, but people are trying. People are slowly trying, and hopefully one day it would. But by then we are all going to be in.
who knows where we'll be.
Yeah.
But Berlin, you also describe in your book as punishment posting for the poor character. He's on punishment posting there. That's almost that is a military term, right?
Yeah, when the characters moved to Berlin, they were not perhaps one of the characters. It didn't sit very well for him. Brigu, the central character, for him, found it very hard to kind of settle into like to leave a universe which he left, and the universe was a subtle, beautiful universe, which is described in 2 pages about like afternoons and evenings and stuff like that. It was a very lovely, extremely privileged lifestyle that they maintain, and you could also even the murmurs of the universe seem to be at sync with your heartbeat.
Yes, I actually wrote down those words you use: lazy, erotic, mysterious, breezy.
Yes.
Huh?
Yeah, and you are in the center of that world, and you know how to play that world. So for him to be like physically removed from that place because of whatever geopolitical reasons, it already started in a bad way, on a bad note in Berlin. For years, it was very hard to kind of capture that to kind of develop any love for Berlin, because it felt like it was a punishment posting, because you've been kicked out of something that you love so much. And on top of that, people seem to think that you're coming to Berlin, by coming to Berlin you've kind of ticked made a notch over like some kind of an achievement, that okay, now you're out. But that wasn't that bad. That time it wasn't so
well, it was bad enough that the character left. What you say is a geopolitical reason was actually a series of conflicts between India and Pakistan, and a mixed marriage between an Indian man and Pakistani woman. So even so, the experience of going to Germany, to Berlin, did not seem to soften the sense of loss of Delhi, of India. So that I found very intriguing, because yes, as someone who lives here, as someone who reads stuff which is written here, it is an escape, right? To be away from this geopolitical tension.
Yeah, so when the geopolitical tension becomes part of it, I don't care about geopolitical tensions.
Exactly, no one does, right?
Yeah.
It's just like it's your life.
Yeah,
at the end
and
of
I'm
the
not
day.
a journalist, so I mean, मेरा क्या जाता है? Geopolitical tension हो रहा है, yeah, it is affecting us in any way, but हाँ, Mexico में भूचाल हुआ, yeah, it affects us like any normal person, it can affect us, but it does not like shake us into like sort of Trump ने क्या किया उसे region like make you. But when that geopolitical or this bilateral relationship to countries affect your marriage so directly, that is when you start kind of getting very nervous, because you just want to be a normal person living a normal life and having normal bunch of friends and do normal things, and then you're like put into this sort of exalted positions. I didn't want it to be an example of Indo-Pak relationship, or we just wanted to just like wanted to like just have a regular normal life, and like very understated and all that, and that was becoming more and more difficult to kind of continue in India. And this was 2010. And at some point, even living was fantastic, no question. It's just like dealing with the bureaucracy was just terrible and terrifying. So we left, and then it was a hard. It was like breaking into a very hard shoe, Berlin. And then I guess I really tried quite hard to kind of enchant Berlin, and I did a column for Hindu when Siddharth was the editor, and it was called Enchanted Cities, or something, I forgot the name of it. I tried very hard to kind of put together a Berlin of my imagination, of the Berlin because the first few days are always very interesting, because that's when you're the loneliest, and that's when you like feel everything very deeply, because after that friends and things just get a bit messy and all sorts of things happen in association there. So I tried to record the first few experiences through that column called Enchanted Geographies. And yeah, I mean, a lot of those ideas have kind of come into being in the book as well. But now, after 16 years of living in Berlin, I'm beginning to kind of, because it is all, for me, it is also geography of love, because childbirth and and raising a child. So your all the associativeness of a city also is associated with this other being that you produce, and it is and it's not like a family unit kind of a situation. It is like a father and son situation, or a mother and son situation for Bani, and raising a child as a separated person creates like this one-on-one-ness between the child and the parent, and then sort of geography and food and friends and everything gets amplified. So it has kind of actually created I have to remind myself that one of the most important events of my life actually happened in Berlin, and that's, of course, that's good enough reason to love a city.
Right. But it's Karachi that's in color in Absolute Jafar. Why?
Karachi is a lot of color. It's hard to render Karachi black and white. There's no logical reason for Karachi. Karachi needed color, I think, and I think Karachi was best represented by those washes, those sort of the ochre buildings of Sindh, mixing with this sort of very UP city.
And the
Muhajir.
jinns.
And the jinns who are like all UP jinns, they're Hyderabadian, they're not Sindhi jinns.
They're not?
No Sindhi jinns. They're all UP jinns. And some, maybe a couple of Goan and Parsi ghosts and all that. And the jinns are like sort of, they are shortcuts into unspoken histories, unsaid and undocumented histories. So they come back as ghosts, and the jinns are all, for me, custodians of like, history that has been dabaud or sort of pushed down, and they kind of prakat hota hai through the jinns. And it's a great way to get into discourses which are not, architectural discourses and things like that, without getting into like, like these sort of technical words and all. It's a fantastic way to kind of enter worlds. And these books are also, the book is also, there's a haunt. When you talked about Jhulelal and corridor, you're seeing a fish in a corridor in Jaisalmer house. There's a spookiness. There is always a uncanniness around the book. The mood is like that of otherworldly. Something strange might happen at any given point of time, and sort of hauntings and spookiness is, it's always nicer to create that. Like the reception room of Jabbi's Hotel, which was once upon a time a great hotel, lots of people used to come, has now become like just like some East European ladies who are called in for services, and some businessmen from Tajikistan. So that whole hotel has kind of ruined, and I have memories of this kind of hotel in Great Eastern Hotel in Calcutta. So then there are synagogues which have been turned into like girls' schools. There are the changing rooms of Tariq Road or Kharadar or stuff like that. I found it very dying on a red sky on Rivoli. There's this one jinn standing. For me, it's that sort of blazing sky, and this sort of, I could even feel the breeze coming from. It's called the Quetta breeze, that comes from Quetta, and it's slightly cold and dry into Karachi. So these little geological shifts and all, you need color to do.
Sarnath, so why is there a cheetah in the beginning of the book, and why did that have to be there? And of course, there's a very interesting photographer taking a picture of the animals as well.
First of all, why? Though we don't know why we do what we do. We mostly do things like because something else guides us to do. Why a cheetah starts?
What guided you to?
So the book had many openings. Like like when you write a book, you have many false openings. You don't write samne se end tak. You try to do that. You have many false openings. The going to the sperm sample test was one opening. There was many different openings. There are lots of openings of the book that has been discarded. So you really don't know how to open the book. But once you open the book, then you know how to get it. It's like a game of chess also a little bit. The opening decides where it kind of moves. But the game of chess is much more logical, and this was there are no rules. So basically, I was playing with many openings, and then so much has been said about migration, and so much like has been talked about like people migrating, that I just could not. I didn't want to make it so homocentric for some reason. Then I thought of migratory birds and all that. But then I was like toying with the idea, and a cheetah just sort of, I mean, I drew a cheetah as a part of a set design for Brigo's room, and a cheetah came there for some reason, and then I just took the cheetah, and then I just followed the arrival of a cheetah in India, and the photographs and everything and stuff like that. So it just sort of, I think, happened very organically.
Sort of the ultimate migrant.
Ultimate migrant.
I mean, the cheetahs have no choice in the affair.
Yeah, I had a choice. The cheetah didn't. But and do I also have a choice? Yeah, these are questions to be sort of worked out by the readers. More than me. I mean, I also, like I told you, I often don't know the intentions behind what I do because this unknowingness is actually quite liberating. As long as you kind of make sense, the story makes sense. The story has a logic of its own, and it follows a certain kind of a certain perception that is uniform. I think that's enough. Baki to it is work for the comic book writers make their readers work hard. It's not Netflix. It has many interpretative values, possibilities.
And on that note, Sarnath, thanks very much for joining us. And thank you very much for watching.